The Audit is the 10th episode of the third season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Terry Hughes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's not my favourite episode. I feel like every other scene was interesting, so I'd say it's maybe 50-60% interesting with a few not necessarily that interesting moments. Also, not necessarily the funniest episode, but I still enjoyed it enough. It starts off with Blanche saying she hasn't had a date in 8 days. Rose needs to become bilingual to get the job that she wants, or the promotion that she wants. And then Stan arrives. And immediately I thought, brilliant, another Stan episode. I don't like Stan. But actually, I didn't mind him in this episode. I wouldn't say I loved him, but he was okay. And it turns out that he's being audited. And it's going as far back as when he and Dorothy were still married. And there might be a problem. He comes over with some receipts, and we temporarily have a sweet moment where we learn that actually he spent quite a lot of money on an anniversary gift for Dorothy, and she was really taken by this. And then she found out he bought a car without telling her, so that quickly fell apart. And they visit the auditor, and it turns out they both owe $2,500. They owe $5,000 in total, and that's a lot of money, and they have a very short amount of time to come up with this money, otherwise there are going to be serious consequences. And we have this, I guess, interesting scene around the table in the kitchen where things don't always turn out the way we want them to. And I think this was a really meaningful moment where Dorothy establishes that she was always careful with money, but look, it's come around to bite her because of Stan. Rose said that she never thought she'd be single and working at this age. And it just goes to show that you can take steps to try and be in a certain place at a certain point in your life. But as Sophia points out, there's no such thing as security. It's important to be as careful and cautious as possible, but we cannot ever guarantee anything. And this is what we have here. They then decide to go down to the pawn shop and they pawn a few things. And Dorothy ultimately ends up pawning the ring for $1,200. This is the ring that Stan got her as an anniversary present. And I think that seems like, I don't know anything about pawn shops, but that seems like a pretty decent amount of money because we learned in the receipt scene that it cost him somewhere in the region of $2,000. I can't remember exactly. So to get about half the money back seems pretty decent. But as I said, I know nothing about pawn shops. I just thought it was interesting. And then we do have a moment with Stan that's quite sweet. And we're basically at the end of the episode now. Evidently, not a lot happens, not the most varied. I haven't got any quotes to share. I didn't think it was that fascinating. But the scene, I'll get to the ending in a moment, but the scene with at the kitchen table where Sophia points out there's no such thing as security and that things don't always end up the way we thought they would, I definitely think was a really moving scene. And this is the scene where Stan comes over and it turns out he'd actually found out from Sophia that Dorothy had pawned her ring and he'd gone down to the pawn shop and got it back. And my first thought was, oh, if you can afford that, how are you making Dorothy pay for $2,500? But we do get information on that in a moment. And it's a really lovely moment. And we find out that actually he was able to afford it and come up with his half of the $2,500, or his half of the $5,000 rather, because he sold the car. And we have this lovely moment where they hug and then we get a bit of humour. And it's not a bad ending to the episode. I thought it was actually a pretty decent ending. That was quite sweet. So in general, it's not a bad episode. I definitely wouldn't say it's a bad episode. I just think that maybe it wasn't as funny, wasn't as interesting as a lot of other episodes. But I didn't dislike it. There are definitely some strong moments, some interesting messages as well. Ultimately, The Audit is a decent enough episode, but definitely not a personal favourite.